Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Passing Moments of Existence. This is a brand new podcast that I, Bradley Marcus, am starting. If you're familiar with me on TikTok, I talk about Theravadan Buddhist practice and how we can all live happier, more peaceful, healthier lives through that practice. This goes beyond any sort of religion, so check that at the door. This goes into practice and philosophy, and by understanding these ancient Eastern techniques, we can begin to be better people, be more compassionate, become more successful, become more happy and peaceful overall. Today's episode, though, is going to be a really fun one because what we're going to be discussing is the Buddhist perspective on finding comfort amidst health challenges. Now, a follower of mine reached out to me with a question regarding the problem they have with Buddhism. Specifically, in the past, this person was a Christian and always looked towards Jesus Christ to hold their hand, especially in health concerning situations. That being said, I told this follower that I would answer their question in a long format, so here we are. So today we're going to be addressing that feeling of safety that one will have when they have faith within Jesus and how we can reframe it in a Buddhist philosophy, because as you may or may not know, Buddhists don't believe in a creator. There is no God that created the universe, so to speak, in Buddhist practice. There is no Jesus to hold our hand, and the Buddha is not one to hold our hand either. They will not take us across the path, but instead, in Buddhist philosophy and Theravadan philosophy and practice, we are the ones who walk that path ourselves. So we're going to discuss a bit more on how to apply this path into our daily lives and also into the tough days when we have these health challenges. So, as I mentioned, this follower had asked me this question. I further elaborated and they let me know that it really was because they had sepsis, a terrible disease of some sort. Maybe it was not sepsis, but they let me know that they were running into a health challenge and no doctors could help them. None of their family could help them, but what really made them feel better was knowing or feeling that Jesus Christ was there beside them and that God would help them and usher them through this tough time in their life. So while there may be comfort in that, for many people, including myself, and for many, let's say, atheists or agnostics and Buddhists, we do not, for a lack of a better term, buy in to that belief. It requires a dogma, a blind faith. And also in Buddhist practice, we do not have blind faith. So what will a Buddhist do? What does an atheist do? What does an agnostic do in a tough time, such as having an incurable disease, or such as in having a time where no doctors can help them? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So when it comes to our health and mortality, it is quite concerning when we really start to look at it. And in today's video, we're going to start to discuss the different Buddhist concepts on how to deal with our health and our mortality. Specifically, we're going to look into the nature of self, impermanence, liberation from attachment, rebirth, and ultimately acceptance. So, let's first discuss what's known as the triple gem. The triple gem in Buddhism probably is the closest thing that one could attest to being like Jesus or the Holy Spirit. Funny enough, there are three of them. They are the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Now, the Buddha is the teacher. You may have heard the West call him the Buddha. The Dhamma is the teachings, or the Dhamma, which also translates into way of life, or even truth. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then finally, the Sangha are the students, the monastics and the laymen that practice the Dhamma and learn from the Buddha. So if you are a practicing Buddhist, you are part of the Sangha. Now, the Sangha or a Sangha can be a community of people as well that practice Buddhism within their community. What's important about the triple gem is that many Buddhists will take refuge in these three pieces. And this does look different than taking refuge in Jesus, and I'll elaborate that on that in a minute. Because what that really means is we are not having this reliance on the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, but instead we are shifting that reliance unto ourselves. But the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are more symbolic representations of what we can achieve by following the Dhamma. Remember, the Dhamma are the teachings. So if we follow these teachings fully and wholefully, if we follow these teachings without blind faith, as the Buddha recommended, and if we follow these teachings simply with practice, showing up with discipline, we will be able to reap the benefits of these teachings, which is different than how Christians will look at Jesus. Jesus is known to be someone who, if you accept, will take care of all of your problems for you. Will make sure that you get into heaven no problem. He's kind of like, almost feels like the bouncer outside of a club. Where instead, we are the ones who must do this thing on our own as Buddhists. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, we are not saying to the Buddha, thank you, here's my hand and guide me through this. Take me and I will close my eyes and not move, and you can pick me up and take me through. Instead, we take refuge in the Buddha out of respect. We know that he is the teacher who has laid out this path for us. He discovered this path that had always been there, but he discovered it for himself. That's why he's the Buddha. And as we become enlightened beings, we ourselves will become what's known as an arahant. An arahant is simply an enlightened person who followed a Buddha, but a Buddha is someone who did not follow anyone. So, yes, we are following the Buddha, but the Buddha is not holding our hand necessarily. We are following the path. He's not picking us up and taking us with him, as Christians might see Jesus Christ doing. The Dhamma is that path itself. When we take refuge in the path, we know that this path will lead us there. And we know this through our own experience, which is another huge key aspect in Buddhist practice. We must understand this for ourselves. We must be able to walk this path, see the benefits. The example would be, the Buddha says, if you walk this path, you'll eventually come to a clearing where you will see the ocean that you are headed towards, that beautiful ocean. So as we walk the Dhamma, as we walk the path, and we start to practice the Dhamma, we eventually get to that clearing. So we take refuge in the Dhamma, not simply through blind faith, but because we have walked and then we have observed, oh, there's the ocean that he spoke about. I can see it in the distance. It's beautiful. These are part of the teachings. This is really a big part of Buddhist practice. So if you're new into Buddhism, or if you're familiar, you know this already. We have to walk the path ourselves. We do not simply blindly close our eyes and allow the Buddha to pick us up. That's not how Buddhism works. And then finally, the Sangha. The Sangha would be the group in the tour, so to speak. The Sangha would be your tribe that you walk with. We are all walking our own individual path. However, they are there as support to keep us on that path when needed. So again, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we take refuge in the Triple Gem. We also may pay homage to the Buddha out of respect, and to the Dhamma, and to the Sangha. But really, when we take refuge, it is not taking refuge with blind faith. It is taking refuge with respect. And the more that we take refuge with this respect, and the more that we practice, the more that we learn this truth for ourselves. There's a term in Buddhism called panya, or panya, which means wisdom. It simply means understanding for ourselves, this wisdom, this truth. We'll discuss this a bit more moving forward, but that is something that I think we should really think a lot more about. So let's discuss a little bit more about the next topic of how we can deal with health challenges and how a Buddhist would deal with health challenges, and that is with the nature of self. So, the body is not self. So if you're having a health issue, what might be comforting as a Buddhist is to remember that the body is not self. And furthermore, our feelings are not self. Now, these two aspects that I have just mentioned are two of the 5 aggregates. That's going to be for another time and another episode, but I want you to know that there are 5 aspects that the Buddha said is not self. It's what we perceive to be self. And this is really important because as we get older, which we all will do, and as we get sick, which we all will eventually have to experience, and as we all perish from this life, which again is inevitable, it's important that we recognize the Buddhist truth of non-self, that this body is not self. This hand that I'm holding is not my self. It is not who I am. However, in this daily life, as humans, we feel very different. We feel that this body is us. And when it gets sick, we lose our minds. We freak out. If we're not looking healthy in the mirror, we get upset. We hold so much attachment to this body. We have attachment to this health. And a true Buddhist monk will know that there's no point in chasing this. There's no point in chasing that vanity, chasing looking well, chasing being as healthy as possible. That's not to say that Buddhist monks don't want to be healthy. I'll explain that more in a moment, but my point here is that this endless chase to prevent ourselves from perishing, the unlimited supplements that we could take, the amount of work that can be done on a person's body to look younger, it's frivolous, really. Because what is it going to achieve? Sure, maybe a few more years of life, even a few more decades if we're lucky. But it doesn't matter because eventually we will perish. This is very, very important because our attachment to our bodies leads to our suffering. So when we have these health challenges, we can look at this acceptance that we are not our bodies. Now, to quickly elaborate on the point I mentioned earlier, this does not mean that we don't take care of ourselves. I feel I have to say that, even though I think it is a bit obvious. It simply means that we recognize the truth that this body is impermanent in self, in nature. So reflect on that. You can pause the video if you'd like and just look at your hand. This hand one day will get old and decrepit. It will not look as vibrant as it does now. And eventually it will perish. It'll deteriorate. It will dissolve back into the ground. While this may be scary for some, this is actually a key part of Buddhist practice. So back to the monks. The monks, well, they eat what is given to them, but they do practice being healthy. They try to get an adequate amount of sleep and stay fit so they can continue to practice their mindfulness and so that they can continue to be generous and help others. So they do it with a different intention. It's not necessarily to live as long as possible or to cheat death, but they're doing it in a way that is balanced. They're doing it in a way to continue their practice and to continue to help others and to continue to understand the truth of the Dhamma, this reality. I'd like to elaborate quickly on a nice Buddhist teaching called the middle way. And we can apply the middle way to what I'm talking about right now. The middle way simply means being balanced in all things that we do and finding that middle path. The Buddha said that it is actually not beneficial to meditate endlessly. You must find that balance for yourself. So if you feel that you are meditating 12 hours a day and that is just hurting your body and causing you pain, well then you're not finding that balance, that middle way in that process. Same thing with working out. Are you working out so much that you're injuring yourself, or have you found that balance? Or have you not worked out at all and you're gaining weight and you're being unhealthy? It's finding that balance. And it doesn't just apply to health, but that's where I'm applying it right now. And so when it comes to the self, to this body, the not self, remember that we have to find the middle way in that practice. When we detach from this identification of body, when we practice non-attachment with this body and we stop identifying with it, we're able to liberate ourselves from that suffering. Remember, all things are impermanent. And in the Dhammapada, verse 277, all conditioned things are impermanent. This insight will help us reduce attachment It'll allow us to let go of that fear. It'll allow us to come to accepting the truth that our bodies are impermanent. And if you'd like to, I'd like you right now to close your eyes just for a moment and meditate with me as I guide you. If you can't close your eyes, then simply just listen. This body is not who I am. While I may respect it, while I may love it and care for it, eventually it will deteriorate. We can honor ourselves in that. We can honor our bodies in that way. Simply think about this for a moment. Anchor yourself in your breath and recognize this truth right now. As we move forward with the rest of this podcast and the rest of your practice in life, I also want you to not just take what I say for face value. These teachings that I have told you are the teachings of the Buddha. This is the Dhamma. But even he said, don't believe everything I say. Come and see for yourself. The term is ehipassiko. So as you move on with your practice, remember this verse from the Anatalakahana Sutta. It explains that the body, the feeling, these perceptions, consciousness, and mental formation are all not self. And furthermore, there is self-reliance on you to understand this. This is in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. The Buddha encouraged his followers to remember that we are islands unto ourselves, islands unto themselves. You must rely on wisdom. You cannot rely on me teaching you this, or the Buddha teaching you this, or reading it even, or hearing what I have to say. You have to rely on your own wisdom, your own panya, your own understanding through insight. And how do we achieve this insight? We meditate and we contemplate. I'll leave you with that. As we move on, let's talk a little bit about rebirth. Now remember, in Theravadan Buddhist practice and philosophy, rebirth is a core piece of this practice. Now for those who are maybe atheists and don't have even an inkling of a curiosity that rebirth is an actual thing, this may not apply to you. But if you're someone like me, who is naturally curious, who believes that we do not know everything about ourselves, about this universe, and about the science of being, which Buddhism really is. Buddhism really is a science of being. So if you hold a little curiosity, I'd like you to expand on that and just consider the fact that you have been reborn many times and that this body, while impermanent, is not your only body that you will have. I guess it's kind of the opposite of YOLO. So we have had countless past lives, countless. I'm talking bodies upon bodies that have been buried, that you inhabited at one time in one way or form. This includes animals, this includes different realms, and this includes even different planets, all mentioned in Buddhist cosmology. Furthermore, we will have future lives that we will be able to inhabit. So while this body may deteriorate, that does not mean it is our only body. And this can also give you comfort amidst health challenges. Now, of course, as a practicing Theravadan Buddhist, we understand that it is not our goal to continue to have unlimited bodies. We want to escape samsara. Samsara being the cycle of death and rebirth and death and rebirth and death and rebirth. So really, we don't want to continue to have bodies as the ultimate goal. We want to find Nibbana and achieve Nibbana or Nirvana, which is where we are neither born or die, where we don't exist, but we don't not exist. So this can bring comfort as well. Remember, we don't want to cling to the idea of future bodies, but we can reframe it as a temporary experience in this greater cycle that is samsara. Now, what's great about this, and what's great about what I'm explaining right now and all the things that I've mentioned, is that with practice, we will come to understand these things a bit more. So our mindfulness practice can help us let go of this attachment that we have to our bodies, this attachment that we have to our health. Again, not to push us away from trying to be healthy or trying to live as long as we want or can, but ultimately accepting at the same time that while we may try to be as healthy as possible, eventually we will perish and these bodies will become decrepit and old. Now, there are some scientific studies that really support how mindfulness meditation really helps with neuroplasticity and can really help reduce stress and attachment to the physical sensations that we may have, pleasant or unpleasant. In Buddhist practice, this is also a very big part of how we experience life, these sensations. And so if you're going through a health challenge, your mindfulness practice will be a key factor on how you relate to these pleasant or unpleasant situations and these pleasant and unpleasant sensations. This includes pain. There's another quote that I like to bring up. I don't know if it was the Buddha that actually said it, but it is, "Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional." We can choose whether we suffer. Now, if this is the first time you've ever heard this, you may challenge what I just said. Don't take it from my mouth. Don't take it word for word and believe me blindly. Try it yourself. If you've ever done a 10-day sit where you do a meditation course, silently meditate for 10 days straight, and you really push yourself, which I have done, you will find that this is true. Even today, earlier, I sat down and meditated for 30 minutes. I did not move out of the cross-legged position. Both of my feet fell asleep, but I was able to distance myself, change the relation that I had to that unpleasant sensation. It was quite painful at times. So we're able to change that attachment of having to have things be pleasant all the time, to be perfect all the time, and to get rid of all the pain. It's inevitable. Even if you lived in a bubble, you would still eventually perish. You would still eventually experience old age and sickness. And this is what the Buddha always talked about, and this is why we hold him into such high regard, because he went out to find the answer. What's this all about? Let's move a little bit more forward now. And let's talk about acceptance. We've talked about impermanence of self and body, or what we perceive to be self. We've talked about what we think is ourself. We've talked about rebirth. We've talked about impermanence of all things. But how can this help us come into acceptance? So remember, attachment. Our attachment is the root of all of our suffering. If we cling to something, we will suffer. As an example, with a health challenge, if we cling to our bodies, we will suffer. If we cling to them having to be healthy, we will suffer. And then if we experience pain and we want to get rid of that pain, then we are now clinging to non-pain. Why are we experiencing pain? I need less pain. Clinging to that, we will experience suffering. In the Upadana Sutta, we talk about how clinging to the self also leads to suffering. So with that being said, what are we? If there's this self or not self, how do we explain it? If we're not the body and we're not the consciousness and the sensations and the mental formations and the perceptions, and if all of that is just an illusion, how do we come to an acceptance that that is an illusion? And what are we really? So what I'd like to talk about is this analogy that you may have heard before. It's called the ocean analogy, And it's that we are like waves. This experience as a human, this experience in this body is like a wave in the ocean. It arises just to fall. It arises just to pass. And in fact, all things, all experiences, all moments are waves in an ocean. They come just to go. So if we can look at this experience as a human, as a wave in the ocean, when that wave arises, is that wave part of the ocean? Or is that ocean part of that wave? And furthermore, when that wave does finally pass, can you pinpoint where that wave went? Can you say, oh, I see that wave, there it is, it's under that layer right there, I think no. It starts to blend back in with the rest of the ocean. So if we can let go of this fixed self that we hold on to, then we can start to flow naturally with life. We can start to come to acceptance that we are the wave. And by dissolving into the ocean, we free ourselves from this suffering. What this looks like is more of a non-dualistic approach, which you may have heard of before, and Buddhists may be considered non-dualist in nature. And if you've never heard that before, the best way to describe non-dualism, the way that I like to describe it, is it is the understanding or the philosophy or the experience of abiding in non-dual awareness. Meaning that as I am here, I acknowledge that there is nothing separate from me. But at the same time, that does not mean that it is a one thing that I'm part of. You may have heard the term oneness. The problem with oneness and how it's different than dualism is than non-dualism, is it actually is dualism in nature. Oneness means that this is one thing that I'm part of, but for this one thing to be here, there has to be something else that is not part of that one thing. So non-dualism is actually ineffable. It is actually impossible for me to describe. It is something that has to be understood for oneself. And as I'm describing it to you, you may have quick glimpses of what it actually means. And I encourage you strongly to meditate on non-dualism to really understand. But the best way is to explain it is that it is just being. This ocean, this wave, whether they're the same or not, doesn't matter. They all are just being. This experience as a human, we are simply being. We are not here and not here. We are simply being. And that's how we are not different from each other, but we are also not part of one. Instead, we are this beingness. And from a Buddhist perspective, this body, this consciousness, these mental formations, perceptions, etc., these 5 aggregates are not us. They are the illusion of self, and there also is no self. So we must find our middle way in understanding what I'm saying. And that will take time for you. But the best way, like I said, to explain it is just understanding that we are beingness. So there's no way for me to pinpoint it and draw it on a piece of paper for you or say it in a sentence in an English language that you can understand and say, there it is. Got it. Which I find to be quite poetic and doing this experience justice. And as opposed to saying, well, I have a soul and okay, I can pinpoint that, and okay, Jesus is going to take me to heaven and I can pinpoint that, and then I'll be in heaven forever and I can pinpoint that. It goes beyond words. And wouldn't that make more sense anyway? Wouldn't that actually be a bit more of what it's really all about? It goes beyond this English language or any human language for that matter. And that our true essence, our true being is beyond words. Again, don't believe me. Take time, meditate, understand this truth for yourself. Contemplate, investigate, and realize for yourself. So some practical steps on how to really accept all of these things. I want you to allow feelings to arise and pass without resistance throughout your day. When you see something negative come up or positive, just observe it. Allow it to arise and pass. Experience it too, but don't cling to it. To get good at this, you're going to want to start a meditation practice, which you may have already been doing. A few minutes a day is all you need. The better you get at it, the easier this will become. And the reason that this is so helpful is because it will allow that acceptance that I had mentioned to come so effortlessly. There's no way to think our way out of perishing. There's no way to think our way to live forever. There is no way to think our way out of illness. Of course, things and steps can be taken, but it is inevitable. It's true. I hate to say it, or maybe I don't hate to say it. So if you want to get to that acceptance, then mindfulness will be able to give you that strength, that faculty, that understanding of truth. Self-reliance. Remember, as I said earlier, we are not relying on an external entity. So use that mindfulness practice to stay present with your physical sensations and emotions and observe their transient nature in nature. Observe their beingness. Remember too, things aren't always going to be comfortable in this life. I'm sure your parents maybe said that to you once in life. Life is not fair. It's true. Life is uncomfortable. It's true. The Buddhists understand this so well. They had a whole word for it. It's called dukkha. It means suffering. It means unsatisfactoriness, being uncomfortable. It's so much more beautiful to just accept it. So we don't need to rely on any external entities in accepting this dukkha. We can simply just accept it. We can stop fighting it. Again, doesn't mean that we don't take precautions to try to live a nice, happy, and healthy life, but we do it with the understanding that it is inevitable. And in that way, we find peace, my friends. In that way, we find acceptance. And in that way, we don't need those external entities to bring us this peace. And I think that's where I'd like to end this first episode of the Passing Moments of Existence podcast, that many of us will find peace if we search for it, but we don't need an external entity to help us with that. And I think many religious people will find that Jesus or God or Allah will give them that peace, and that is fine, and I have no qualms with that. This is just my perspective, but for me, I'm not somebody who has ever been able to do that. I have to put it on myself. I have to find those answers for myself. I can't let go to not knowing. Or rather, I should say, I can't just give it up to Jesus or to Allah or to God. Because I know deep down within me that it is on me. It is on me to come to that acceptance. And so in a way, religious people find that acceptance through believing in those deities or entities or divine entities. But for somebody who does not believe in a creator, who does not believe that these creators are what going to guide us, these creators and deities are going to guide us to that peace, instead that we find that peace within ourselves, for ourselves, that is why this practice is so important to me. So remember that we do not need these external entities to find that peace. Others may use Jesus Christ to find that peace, but we don't need to do that. We can simply find that peace within ourselves. And that acceptance will come as we look for it, as we understand the Dhamma, and these truths, as we understand the nature of reality, that all things are impermanent anyway, and that if we just stop clinging and stop grasping to health and self and body and money and power, which is all fleeting and will never be enough anyway, then we can actually allow it to be enough. We can finally let go and accept that this body is not self, and in fact it is simply an illusion of self. I myself have a personal story that I'd like to share with you about grief and about acceptance. When I was 19, I moved out to Los Angeles and left my entire home and friends and family behind to explore becoming a professional music producer. And in that time, I met a really good friend of mine when I was about 19 years old, 20 years old. And we grew up making music together. And a little less than 10 years after I met him, he moved to Tennessee out of Los Angeles. And within less than 6 months after him moving to Tennessee, he one day passed away in the Cumberson River and drowned. He was 28. His name was Dakota. And I thought I knew what grief was before this experience, or at least had an idea, but man, this was different. It took me a long time to accept his passing, but the one thing that I remember focusing on during my grief was being present with it. I did not want to drink myself away from it. I did not want to distract myself away from it. I allowed pockets of space when I was ready and had the strength and the faculty to face it and the bravery in those moments. And I did that periodically over a period of about almost a year. And in doing that, I was able to be so present with those feelings. I was able to observe them being transient in nature, how some moments I was so stricken with grief and sadness, and in other moments I was angry, and in other moments I was bargaining and denying, and in other moments I was accepting, all recognizing that I was simply just an observer of this experience. And in doing so, I honored him. I honored that experience, and I honored those feelings. Grief is one of the hardest things I think we experience as humans, but it is part of this ocean of impermanence, this ocean of non-self, this ocean of beingness, this coming and going as we all do. And I know that one day I will perish as well, and someone will be grieving me. But again, the acceptance can be found by processing, by being present. And this is what mindfulness has done for me. And this is what the Dhamma has done for me. And I believe that he's been reborn into another life, living well, hopefully, learning. And so in a way, it's all a process. Because even though we may be in samsara, we are working towards that goal of nibbana or nirvana. And because of that, we are still part of that process. We are still accepting. We're still working towards that at least. And in doing so, we suffer less. And so it's all okay because we're all just being, aren't we? So as we dissolve this identity, as we have the dissolution of identity, we have that liberation, not just from releasing the attachment of the body, but understanding this beingness that I have mentioned. As we also find that balance on how to understand that, we can refer to the Kachanagata Sutta about the middle way and avoiding this understanding of existence, but also avoiding this understanding of non-existence, right? We are really just resting in what is, that beingness, We're not trying to define, oh, here we are existing, oh, wait, maybe we don't exist. Is there a self? Is there not a self? Doesn't matter. And if it does matter, all I'll say is neither is right. Remember to regularly meditate on impermanence and non-self. Remember, not self, but not self. Remember to meditate on what is that beingness. You can also journal and reflect daily on these things and start to use mindfulness, meditation, and understanding this practice by building neural networks in the brain and helping us come to this acceptance and letting go of this stress and fear. And remember that we can use equanimity and this clarity to liberate ourselves and liberate other individuals from their own suffering. The comfort in Buddhism does not come from the Buddha helping us and taking us and picking us up and walking us the path. We have to walk that path. He simply gave us the map. So really, the comfort in Buddhism comes from the insight that we get from practicing Dhamma. We do not rely on external entities. The body is not self. And in fact, impermanence is simply natural and freeing if we let it be. And we can find that acceptance once we dissolve the illusion of self, once we accept this constant flow of beingness, of coming and going, of constantly arising and ceasing. Remember to practice all of these things that I have said in your own practice. You can look up the Satipatthana Sutta for that. I want to thank my follower for this amazing question. It was a great episode, and some of the suttas that I have mentioned in this podcast are the Maha Parinibbana Sutta, the Anattalakhana Sutta, the Kachanagata Sutta, the scientific papers, Kabat-Zinn J, 1982, an outpatient program in behavioral medicine for chronic pain patients based on the practice of mindfulness meditation and how that helped them. And then also Hosel BK, how does mindfulness meditation work? And I also shared a personal story with you on how I apply this into my daily life. I hope this passing moment was helpful to you in this podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube about what you'd like me to cover next. Don't forget to check me out on TikTok, Bradley Marcus is, Instagram, etc. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you want to have personal coaching calls where I can talk a little bit more about how to apply Dhamma to your daily life. But a lot of this stuff is free for you to take in. And I hope that you are well today. I hope that you are present today. I hope that you meditate today. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak to you today, because this was it was very enlightening for myself, and I enjoyed it very much. May you be well. May you be free of suffering. May all sentient beings be free of suffering. Sending you lots of metta. See you on the next episode.